Okay.
Let's give people a minute just to join, and then we'll call the meeting to order.
We had 2 members in the audience. I just promoted them.
Perfect. Okay. So we are not quite everyone, but pretty close. So why don't we go ahead? Hang on one second. Let's call this meeting to order. It is 8:17. This is the meeting of the Southborough ARPA Committee. I'm going to read the remote statement. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, signed into law June 16th, 2021, this meeting will be conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance by members of the public will be permitted. So let's do a roll call. Ms. Rubenstein?
Present.
Mr. Wood? Not here. He's texting me. Oh, should be open. All right, let's continue. Mr. Palmer?
Here.
Mr. Martell?
Hi.
Mr. Schoner?
Here.
Ms. Luttrell?
Here.
And Andrea Hamilton is present. Before we jump in, can I get someone to volunteer to take minutes?
I can do it.
Thank you, Anne. I appreciate it. All right. Good. So I appreciate everyone finding time to join today. I know there was a lot of back and forth with the rooms. So since we could only get in at 8, now 8:19, I wanted to sort of put a pin in our long form meeting. We'll return to that next week and really have a focused conversation here around some information that's come in over the last week regarding fiscal year 23 requests. So there's kind of 3 main pieces that have come up that I want to discuss here. One is the email we received sort of outlining some high level suggestions from the select board. So there was one around spend for capital items, things in the capital plan, but then more importantly, that last bullet that around potentially using up to $1 million of the ARPA funds to offset tax increases over a multi-year period. And so if we wanted to do that for 23, we'd need to make a decision before March 1 as a recommendation. And I did follow back up to see if any money had been like firmly allocated at this point by the select board, and the answer was no, that we should consider separate from that. That goes along with overall tax increases for next year. And I'm hoping that John joins because he'd been doing some digging, and I guess our overall tax rate increase for next year is going to be higher than initially expected. And so because of that, it might actually be something, raise up a priority to consider allocating some money to help offset that for next year. And then the last one is there is a Board of Health request for an added headcount that's somewhere in the 50K to 80K range that would need to be allocated out of ARPA money for next year. So there's sort of those three pieces. And again, I didn't make this a voting meeting. I don't think we have all the information to make a recommendation on any of those things this meeting. These are things that were rolling in over the last couple of days, and I wanted to give us some time and space to discuss them so that if there's information we need to collect before next week, we can do that. If we want to say, no, we said originally that we don't feel like we can make a decision before March 1 and we're going to stick to that, then we hold our guns and that's what we do. Or if we want to come prepared to make a decision on a smaller allocation next week, we can do our due diligence between now and then. So that's what I have. Are there any initial questions on any of that, or anyone who wants to kick off a discussion? Oh, hey, John. That's good, because I'm going to kick it over to you to give us the overview of sort of what you found when you talked to advisory. I was just giving the high level overview of the three pieces of information that came up this week that are kind of driving us to have a discussion about whether or not we want to think about pre-allocating some money for that March 1 deadline, or making a recommendation to pre-allocate. So again, it's that email that came in from the select board saying they would support up to $1 million to offset tax increases. The Board of Health request for a headcount that would need to go into fiscal year 23 budget for 50 to 80K, and then sort of your research into our overall tax rate for next year. So do you want to give kind of a high level overview of what you found when you were digging into that? Is John hearing anything I'm saying?
I heard. I didn't know. I didn't.
I was going to kick it to you to kind of give the overview.
Sorry,
on the
I came
tax
in
rate
and I
piece.
heard you saying you were going to kick it to somebody. I didn't know it was me, so I apologize.
Yes, no, it's you. If you don't want to, I've got your numbers up. I can run through them. Up to you.
Sure. So what started this is the other night I was thinking about the tax rate and stuff, and I had heard that it was going to be at like 6.95%, which is kind of crazy high. And I know at the beginning we said, we didn't have enough time to talk about this before town meeting. But then I reached out to Brian Ballantyne at the treasurer's office, and he said it's like I think I have I apologize, I don't have my email open right here.
I've got it. Do you want me to go through the numbers?
Yeah, just what it was with that. Basically, it was like 4.63 straight across, but with that's not taken into account the shift in residential commercial rates. So it's realistically
6.75.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that if 700,000 of the ARPA fund was used, it would have brought it down to 5.32. I'm so close. 5.22. And if we used 808, that would bring it down to 4.99. And that was still like, whoa, that's pretty high to me. With the capital items that were already vetted through capital committee, I just wanted to, I thought we should at least discuss it more. And then that was the other day. And then at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, I guess they kind of went with the same thing. It looks like they released, they want to use some free cash, like to offset it, like 300. So if we use 500 of it, we could get the tax rate down to 4.99. Still not great, but better. So that's what started my thoughts on it, and why I wanted to put it on the agenda for more discussion tonight. That good enough, Andrea?
Yeah, and so right now, so there's 300 allocated that the select board wants to allocate out of free cash, and so now we're saying we'd potentially meet it with the 500 to bring ourselves down to a more reasonable rate. And my understanding is that the thought process you had there was that it would basically pay for all the items, all the capital items that would be in the warrant this year, and so that would sort of be how you think about it.
Yeah, it's already good. They're already been vetted. They're already in the warrant, so it's taking that off the overall budget, which would bring the tax rate down.
And I think you had said that just to put that into context, if we did 700, you sort of calculated that's about around per household.
Yep.
And 800 was
About $200 per household.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of the numbers that we're thinking about.
Which is a substantial savings for,
Yep.
I know that's not a lot of money to a lot of people in this town, but it's a lot of money to a lot of people in this town as well. And, if we're trying to help people through COVID, I know a lot of people that, their businesses were slow. If they own their own business, they didn't make what they made. They may have worked, but their incomes might be down. So $200 is $200.
Yep.
So
I'm never going to argue what's meaningful to someone. Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Schoner.
So just to recap those numbers again. So to pay for the ARPA contribution to cover all of the already approved capital items on the town warrant, that number is what?
So be clear, right? They're not approved.
Well, all right. So but they're on the town warrant.
They're not approved. They're on the warrant for voting.
So but they haven't been voted on yet. Correct. So this would be approving an unvoted on.
Yep. Yeah. So the
approved to be in the warrant
on the
is what I
town
meant,
warrant.
Tim. Sorry,
go ahead, Mr. Schoner.
The capital items on the town warrant, the ARPA would need to provide how much to cover them?
I think the original number you gave me, John, I think was in the 700s, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're something like 450. We'd need an exact number, obviously.
I think Mr. Palmer would probably know that more than I right now. But my thought was if we use it to offset the capital items, not that if they're voted on and approved at town meeting, the ones that have been vetted through capital already are now on this year's FY23 budget warrant. If we covered that, then that would drop the tax rate down to 4.99, saving roughly $200 a year per household off the tax bill. So,
so a significant saving to the taxpayer, also a significant portion of our overall funds. So I think both statements to be true. Mr. Palmer, we're getting that about right? It was a little over, it was something like maybe 750 was the total capital number.
I honestly couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the amount going on to the warrant is at the moment.
Okay.
Not even a little. I think my comment here would be that whatever amount of one thing, as Tim said, this stuff is still unapproved, has to go through the warrant. We'll see how it gets picked apart at town meeting. I would say that we don't need an excuse to put a figure on whatever we're going to put, given the revenue loss contingency, right? We can pretty much just input money into the budget if we feel like it, as far as I'm aware. We don't actually have to have an excuse. We could list whatever we want to pay for, pretty much on the go. And it would be pretty much accepted as long as it was within the approved categories of spending. So if we're interested in taking down, a tax rate increase as we see it, whatever it is, it may go through town meeting and get lower. But if we're committed to doing that, then it's merely amount of putting a recommendation on a figure to the select board. The select board will approve whatever it wants. We could say that we would put all the money that we want toward it being a 5% increase, no matter what happens at town meeting. And they could merely just assign a figure at town, sort of after town meeting and approve it and put it on there. So I don't think that we need to go through a lot of deliberations or excuse about what, how much we're going to put based upon arbitrary things that are on the warrant now.
When you say after town meeting, is there a mechanism by which, so again, I'm just sort of thinking about the timing, right? So my understanding is that this March 1 deadline is because anything that's on the warrant would need to be decided before March 1. Do we have levers to make recommendations that hit post like that date, right? Like, could you put something to vote to apply some of the money at town meeting? Like how fixed is that March 1 date, and what options do we have if we would rather deliberate against everything at the same time? I see Mr. Martelli, your hand's up. I'll go to you. Oh, you're muted, Tim.
Thank you. I don't have an answer to your question. I don't want to derail you. So if you want to.
No, that's okay. Go ahead and comment. I'll come back to it because that's the big thing in my mind, is trying to figure out like how real March 1 is. So if you go ahead,
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll come back
No,
to it.
I was thinking about this the same way Joe was thinking about it. When you look at our budget, we have a row, in the Excel sheet. There's the town revenue, right, and there are other rows where money's coming in, maybe from the state or what have you, and then there's whatever delta you have between that revenue and the budget, right? That's our appropriation, right? That's our tax appropriation. And I was just thinking about this as there would be one more row on the revenue side called ARPA. And it would be an amount that we give the selectmen a recommendation, they vote on it. And it's just one more row, which ultimately will reduce the amount that has to be appropriated later on. We don't have to put it against anything explicit, and we don't have to, it seems simple, and it doesn't take any votes away from town meeting. If I'm wrong in my thinking, let me know.
So you're saying we just apply it, correct? Is there any administration that comes with that in some way? Like if it's
I thought we could simply apply it to the budget, and then it would whatever the amount of the budget that's not covered by the revenue and has to be appropriated, this amount we put in would simply skim off the top of that and lower the appropriation. That's how I was thinking. Does anybody disagree with that?
Mr. Palmer, I see. Oh, yep. Sorry, go ahead. Does anyone have any knowledge related to that to add to before I go on to Mr. Palmer and this sort in some technical weeds that I don't know that I have good answers for? Okay. Mr. Palmer.
I think that we probably should not get bogged down in the how right now. I mean, we can bring in people next week to give us the answers as to how it would have to be structured, whether we have to have a town warrant article to be voted on to allow that mechanism to happen, or whatever the process is. I think what's more important to us is to make the decision as to whether we actually want to allot the funds to do that purpose, and then we'll figure out the how afterwards.
That's fair. Mr. Schoner?
Yeah, so along those lines, and again, I'm kind of new to how the town government process works and how funds are authorized and how the tax rates are calculated. But so I think what I'm learning here or hearing is that if we want to use ARPA funds, if we want to recommend that ARPA funds be used in a manner that reduces the tax rate for the next, I guess, fiscal year, we need to make this recommendation before the town meeting, or we need to tell the select board by whatever that date is in March. Is that correct? It's just that simple. So if we wanted to say, take $1 million, save everyone in town, help them recover from COVID, whatever, take $1 million, and we wanted to impact the tax rate next time round, we have to decide in the next 2 weeks.
So I think the answer is yes and no. Sorry. I think, no, we don't have to. We can apply it after the fact, but if it's going to impact the selectmen's decisions on how much is in the budget. Does that make sense?
Oh, I see. So this is not in 3 months, we could say, hey, we want to use $1 million to offset the next fiscal year tax situation.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that one. So, I mean, if the selectmen know that we're going to put $1 million in, right, then they could turn around. I'm not saying they will, but the select board could turn around and bump the budget up by $1 million in services, right? They could hire more people. Right. If they knew we weren't going to put $1 million in, then it would affect the decisions they make about the budget for next year. So if they know we're not going to recommend putting money into this year's budget, they might pull capital items out, for example. So to your question, yes, it will impact their recommendations at town meeting, but I don't believe we're limited in terms of how we can impact the budget in a short, in the next 2 weeks or what. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense. I'll try one more time, and I'm sorry, I hope I'm not bogging the meeting down. So we can make a recommendation in the next 2 weeks, for example, to use $1 million of ARPA funds to offset taxes in the next fiscal year. we could make that recommendation. We could also make that recommendation on June 1st and have the same impact on the tax situation in the next fiscal year. Is that correct?
So you're starting to get into the weeds that I can't answer. Like, when does the assessor need to know? When does the tax rate have to be set?
I think that's maybe, I think maybe to your point, Tony, that's a really key piece, right? Because in theory, we can vote things out at town meeting, right? So nothing is fixed until we vote at town meeting, right? Because the town can just trash the entire budget if they want. Yeah.
Yes. And at some point in the future, the select board will vote to set the tax rate, right? And then we can't really impact it at that point.
Okay.
But how do they vote? Sorry, go ahead.
No, so not to get, okay. So thanks for trying to answer my question, Tim. In my opinion, it would be perfectly reasonable to use a portion of the ARPA money to reduce the tax rate in the next fiscal year. That seems reasonable to me. That's just my opinion. And so I don't know if as a committee we want to discuss that and make a choice like that, but that seems reasonable to me.
Ms. Luttrell?
I'm so out of my element on these financial things, but I have a couple of questions. The select board mentioned a couple of projects that they would be interested in seeing the funding go to, the Breakneck Hill farm dump and the senior center. Are either of those things currently on the warrant?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So if they were to get funded, we would have to recommend that. And I thought the board said for anything for this fiscal year, they would, or for, I guess it would be FY23, they wanted to know by March 1st. That. Then my other question was, in listening to the select board meeting, I thought, and as I said, I'm way out of my element on these financial things, but I thought Brian Ballantyne was of the opinion that the ARPA fund should go to something specific, because just reducing the tax rate was kind of an illusionary reduction, and there'd be a big bump after these funds are dried up. I don't know.
So I'm looking at, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Palmer.
I was about to say the Breakneck Hill project just went through capital and was endorsed. So that may show up on the warrant from the select board. I mean, I'd like to reiterate what I said before, which I think, why don't we make the decision as to the fact that we're going to do it? And then we can bring in Brian and everybody else and we can figure out how we need to do it. Because we're sort of stumbling over ourselves trying to figure out how to do it. And the reality is that's really not in our hands anyway. We're just making recommendations. It's really the select board's going to have to figure out how to implement and make it happen. And they're the ones that input things onto the warrant anyway, directly. So they can put whatever they want on the warrant, tomorrow. And the legality of it lies in their hands. So I think that we're perfectly appropriate in mandating that we use some money like that. I think it's up to us to just decide, what we're willing to do with it.
Can I take that one step further and say that I think we also need to think about, do we want to do it? To me, I think the biggest thing is, do we want to do it before March 1? And it sounds like if we could make a recommendation significantly later, it just causes some inconvenience, right? Because there might be some decisions that were made or not made about what goes on the warrant prior to that. But I'm seeing this note that Tim dropped, which is that the tax rate for fiscal year 22 was fixed on November 16th. Right, so this is something that gets fixed pretty far in the future. So maybe there's some confirming that needs to happen this week, just to make sure we're not missing a deadline that means we wouldn't be able to do this. But sorry, go ahead.
No. So, I mean, you can imagine, and I'm not saying that this is happening, I'm just throwing a scenario out, right? At the end of the day, it's one pool of money. So the how really doesn't matter. But however, let's say that there's a capital project proposed for the warrant and it's going to be a hassle to get through town meeting. If you dedicate this money to it directly, then you pull that warrant article out and you just fund it and you don't fight with town meeting. And that's the argument for targeting money to different projects and getting it done within the next 2 weeks. And from where I'm saying, that's the only argument.
Yeah, and so the flip of that is not being able to do a full comparison with all the different requests that come in, right? We'd basically be saying, we will prioritize this in the absence of all the requests and having had, meaningful deliberation on those and getting town feedback on them, which doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, right? I mean, there is something to be said for simplifying town meeting, for making sure something that's critical to the town gets done, but that's the counterpoint, right? Is that we'd have to do this without being able to have meaningful deliberation on all the funding requests at the same time. Mr. Palmer?
Sort of adding to Tim's point, if we look at it the way that Tim sort of just framed it, we actually have as much time as now till the annual meeting, because we can pose ARPA funding towards it or recommend it towards any one of those articles between now and town meeting, and it'll just get pulled at the meeting. So we actually, the way that he's phrasing it actually gives us, more time than just getting it in the next 2 weeks. So, I mean, he framed it very well to give us more time and make our decision more calmly is how I would phrase it.
Mr. Schoner?
That's a good point, Joe. I suppose it's possible, though, that, for example, the senior center addition or the senior center project wouldn't make the town warrant unless we recommended in the next 2 weeks that we thought the money should be used for that.
It's not on the warrant now, I believe, and I don't think it would go on the warrant if we. So it would. I think that's a case where it would only get done if we recommended the money, right? If we don't recommend it, I mean, select board can do whatever they want, right? They can disregard ours, but assuming that our suggestions are taken, the only way the senior center happens right now is if we make the recommendation. It's completely independent of the warrant, right? There's I have one example of something where right now the consideration of ARPA is impacting whether or not something goes on the warrant, and that's this Board of Health headcount that right now is not in their budget. And when the budget was presented to the select board earlier this week, they said they were trying to fill that position with an ARPA request, and it's not on their warrant article right now.
Can I speak to that?
Yep, go ahead. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, so they also presented to advisory. Advisory has not voted, but these are new positions. It's a result of COVID, but it's not directly involving COVID, if that makes sense. They're basically expanding the scope of their operations. They're going to be doing a lot more things than, in the past they were focused mostly on flu vaccines and septic and some general public health things like inspections and what have you. And they're really adding to their scope, and they need more people to do that. If we fund this through ARPA, to a degree, it's kicking the can down the road because these are not one-time expenses, right? This is going to go into the budget. They're going to, at some point, they have to go before town meeting and get town meeting to agree. If you look at their budget, it's I forget the number, but it's like a 300% increase year over year. And that's going to be there no matter what. They have to go to town meeting. I just don't know if there's a lot of value. There's a lot of value in what they're proposing. And I'm personally of the belief that town meeting should weigh in and make a choice, right? Does town meeting want these services, yes or no? And that's where I'm going to leave it right now, if that makes sense.
So I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Palmer.
No, I was going to agree 100% with what Tim just said. I mean, anything that's going to add personnel and expand the budget moving forward, I would rather see, I'd like to see advisory weigh in on it, capital weigh in on it, and the town weigh in on it, because that's a continuing cost. And if we forward enough money for a person to be hired, then, you know, especially in the public sector, you know, hiring and firing people is not, you know, the simple, easy process all the time. And I wouldn't want to expand the budget of the town with ARPA funds and then stick everybody with the bill afterwards. It would sort of defeat the point of taking down the tax base or the tax, you know, the tax raise.
Yeah, and I know that I believe there's a longer, it's a patch next year, and there's longer term funding that they have access to, something. But I guess what I'm hearing is basically this would be right, without kind of weighing in on what we think the value of the request is that, you know, this would be something that we just weigh against everything else as it comes in, and sort of the same process, right? And so again, this is sort of the only example that I have received in the last week of something that is currently impacting what is going on a warrant this year, right? So it was not put on the warrant because they wanted to apply for the ARPA funds for it. But I guess that's the roll of the dice then that the Board of Health takes on then, right? Because that's just sort of what it is. Mr. Palmer?
I'd just like to reiterate the point. I mean, if it's going to go through advisory and they're going to endorse it and it's going to go through town meeting, then I would consider it something that maybe it's worth taking up. But if, you know, and before it goes through, you know, the committees that actually make the decisions on, you know, how money's spent in the town and the budgets, very hesitant to just jump in and you know, throw weight behind it.
I'm taking no stance on it right now. This is one that came in, and it came in with this, like, we have to do it in the next 2 weeks. And so it was part of sort of what drove the urgency to this meeting. So I wanted to open it to discussion. Right now, what it'll be a request like anything else, and it'll go on to sort of the log sheet for however we take the final approach for evaluating all the different requests, right? So I think as of now, you know, it's just like anything else that comes in, it goes on a log. And we'll evaluate it when we get to the evaluation portion. Okay, so I think perhaps where we are then is that we're kind of sticking to what we had initially said, which is that March 1 is not really a reasonable deadline for us to make any decisions. And so we're just going to continue on with the timeline that we discussed last week, and we're going to continue to solicit the requests. We're now working against the February 28th deadline. Those new surveys have come out. I've started getting things in. I'm trying to see if we can get a SharePoint set up to put the stuff in instead of having to just like continually forward things to you, because it's going to be just like a log jam in your inbox like it is in mine. But if I can't, I'll start getting them out. But I think we're sort of in the same, marching to the same drumbeat we were last week. Does anyone disagree with that, Mr. Schoner?
Yeah, the only one, and I'll bring up again, I just wonder, I mean, it would have a material impact on the senior center, I think, if we recommended soon, you know, in time for the town meeting, that we thought money should be used for that. Of all the things we've talked about, well, I don't know. I retract that statement. But it seems like we could have a material impact on the senior center if we were willing to recommend in the next 2 weeks. We think money should be used for that.
But how would that change if we made the recommendation in 2 weeks, or we made it in 3 months?
I think it would be up to the select board then. I mean, again, I'm learning, but it'd be up to the select board to decide, do they want to then put it onto the town warrant as a already pre-funded item using ARPA funds to get that project going?
I don't believe the ARPA funds need a town vote. I think it's just select board.
Oh,
they can do it independent. So it's not something we need to sneak up.
Yeah,
unless anyone's understanding is different than that. But
Okay.
Selectmen could use it right away. If we said today, hey, we think that they should do that, Selectmen could contract tomorrow.
Thank you for correcting me. Thank you.
Good. I have 10 minutes left. Is there anything else on this portion of the discussion? I think we're back at where we started, which is good. It means we had a good plan to start with. If not, then I'll move on to public comment. All right, let's go. Do we have anyone in the audience? A hand up. I can't see the audience. Tim, can you see the audience?
Yes, we have Mary Ann. She does not have her hand up.
Okay. All right, then. Then let's move on. The next item is the next meeting. So I have pre-booked rooms now for the next couple weeks for Thursday at 7:30. If that time doesn't work for anyone next week, then we can go and take a look and see what else we could do. But otherwise, I'd propose that we do 7:30 next Thursday and go back to the long form meeting. All right. And we'll circle back to the agenda that we had originally been planning to do for this meeting. I don't have it up in front of me, but again, I know I'd already gotten folks' input on it. If anyone wants to see anything different or changed in the next day or two, just let me know, and I'll update it before I send it out to get posted. And with that, I think we are ready to conclude. Can I motion to adjourn, or does someone else need to motion to adjourn?
You can motion.
Okay, so I will. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Chair, the chair shouldn't motion.
Yeah, I make a motion to adjourn.
A second.
Okay, so let's do a roll call vote. Mr. Schoner.
Aye.
Ms. Rubenstein.
Aye.
Ms. Luttrell.
Aye.
Mr. Martell.
Aye.
Mr. Wood.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
And I will also vote aye. And with that, at 8:52, the meeting is adjourned. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Tim, thanks for hosting, by the way. Taking care of everything for it. Appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Have a great night.